after getting to Deshler, Ohio at 1 p.m. in the afternoon. We left the house at 11:30. Just now getting here at 1 p.m. Yeah, 1 p.m. We had to stop at a gas station in North Baltimore so we could fill up our camper with fresh water. Thankfully, we did not have to pay for it, but whatever. We get here to the park. There was 2 campers there already. However, we were able to park our camper right next to the power source. This would end up being our first train after being here within 2 hours straight. It's about 3:11 p.m. We will be catching M353, a daily manifest coming out of Chicago to Cincinnati, Ohio. He would come from the west to take the southwest connection toward the Toledo subdivision before making his way southbound. In the meanwhile, though, it did have an SD70 Mac, flared one too, trailing second out of 3, with a Jeep with it. Our next train would end up being an eastbound Intermodal for Savannah, Georgia, out of Chicago, Illinois, with a SD70 flared Mac. Let the weekend begin, since we were staying here at Deshler for 2 nights in a row, basically 3 days. But on the last day, we would leave on that Sunday at noon. We got here at 1 p.m. on Friday, which is 4th of July, and now we're seeing these 2 trains, M353 and I195, but the action does not stop from here. The action is just now beginning after seeing 60 plus trains. Let the weekend begin. Our next train that will be going by the park, that is going eastbound out of Willard, is CSX M368. M368 is a Chicago to Southkirk, New York daily manifest. next train will be X429. X429 is coming out of Cumberland, Maryland to Chicago, Illinois. It will have a DC GEVO leading and a Y2 AC44 trailing. After shooting X429 by the park, we came over to Marion Street to shoot M559. M559 is a Willard to Cincinnati train. What leading it is the B&O Heritage Locomotive 1827 heading southbound. M559 today would have the B&O Heritage. Not only that, it would have some MOW equipment out the front of the train. After shooting M559 by Marion Street, we came back to the park and shoot I009. I009 would have a GEs leading it and a YN2 AC44 trailing and a CM44 rebuild trailing 3 out of 3. After shooting I009, it would be another few minutes before we would shoot B115, which would have an ATSF trailing 3 out of 3. And then the next train would be M370 heading to Cumberland, Maryland after coming from Chicago, Illinois, heading eastbound with the CM44 rebuild.
just be a...
After M370 went by, it would be another 20 minutes before we would get another eastbound. However, it would be another 20 minutes before we would get that eastbound. And the sun has finally went down after the day has gone by. It was very hot during the day, almost to 90 degrees this day. So, when the sun went down, it was finally cooling off. However, this would not be far over from not seeing any more trains. This is M368 coming from Chicago, Illinois to Selkirk, New York. There was an extra 368 that we saw earlier, heading to Selkirk as well. After 368 would go by, I thought I would be having some time to kill and just relax when the sun was going down. Well, until this happened. After 368 cleared, it would be another minute till I started hearing another horn from the east. This one is westbound, but a complete different power on this one. Not just CSX, but a trio of BNSF locomotives on a G108 for Cicero, Illinois. after G108. Our next train would be M511. M511 comes from Detroit, Michigan, from Woodmere Yard down to Queensgate Yard in Cincinnati, Ohio. It would be the last train in broad daylight. When the sun was actually going down, it will be another 2 hours till we would get the next train. So 511 would be the last train for a bit. After getting done using the porta potty, there's the end of 511. While M511 was going by, I had to use the porta potty by the park. Yep. And it really didn't have anything special besides a DC GEVO. Yeah, DC GEVO. I could still take it since those are the second units of being like really old. Anyway, our next train would come through pure darkness. And will be M246. M246 is a Columbus, Ohio to Chicago, Illinois. It will come from the Toledo branch. Take the connection at Gallatin, head west on the Willard and Garrett subdivision. Alright, after 11:23 p.m., it's finally time for bed. Not waiting for any more trains after this one. That was M356 heading down to Parkersburg, West Virginia. At 11:23 at night. We're ending it here on the first day. See you all next time, and I will see you guys on the second day.
So that would be the counterpart to something.
Day 2 has arrived. Yes, I got up at 6:30 that morning, but I went to back to bed till 7:30 arrived. I see a SD70 Max twirling on a BNSF trainer heading east. I didn't know what symbol that was, but I do know what the symbol on this manifest that had the Y2 leader. It's M369 coming from Cumberland, Maryland to Chicago, Illinois with a Y2 in the lead. After 369 cleared, I006 was able to get a signal to head eastbound for North Baltimore, Ohio. Chicago, Illinois to North Baltimore train is I006. He normally has JB Hunt and some other containers on this train. Most of the times he is short, sometimes you can see him pretty long, but most of the time that I see I006, he is very short. Sometimes he has 2 locomotives. I most likely see 3 on the train, even if he's short or not. Our next train would be I-115. I-115 is a intermodal from Cumberland, Maryland area to Bedford Park, Illinois. today's leader would have 2 GEVOs in the front and 1 GEVO as a DPU somewhere in the train. Me and a friend saw the rear end of 115, and then we heard another train coming eastbound. It is I018. I018 is a Chicago, Illinois intermodal with wax to Baltimore, Maryland. I seen I018 with 2 locomotives, but lately this year, he has been running with 1 locomotive. Now, what you would see up front is just solid wax till the midpoint of the train is basically B intermodal and trailers at the back end of the train. Once we get I018 to clear up, it will be another 10 minutes till we will get another westbound. This westbound had a solo Y2 AC44 leader. It would be M567. M567 is a Walbridge, Ohio to Garrett, Indiana. Once it gets into Garrett, it would turn into M569. That would turn from 567 to head all the way to Chicago with the new symbol as 569. As the next train that we would get on our radar would be a coal train C895 comes from Princeton, Indiana, heading to Newport News, Virginia, as it's supposed to go through Indianapolis, but sometimes it goes through Deshler. Shiny rebuild, actually, a shiny repaint. That train right there is a M558. M558 comes from the south of Cincinnati, Ohio, going east for Willard, Ohio. This train is a daily manifest train coming from the south going east for Willard. After the power went by, however, we did hear a distant horn in the distance. Before catching 558, we didn't know what train this is. Hell, I figured it out. This one is I010. I010 is a daily intermodal / bound for Port Newark, New Jersey, coming from Chicago, Illinois, with a Y&2 trailing out of the lead. 558 and aisle 10 cleared. We would get a southbound coming from the east, heading for Cincinnati, Ohio. This one is 561, coming from Selkirk, New York, bound for Queensgate Yard, Cincinnati, Ohio. It would have a ST23 Tier 4 locomotive Trailiing 2 out of 3. There would be a DPU on that, but I did not want to get the DPU. However, after 561 cleared, we would get an eastbound signal. And this train right here is B158. B158 is a Coke Train Express coming from the CN territory from Gary, Indiana, all the way to Willard, Pennsylvania. After B158 cleared, it was going to be a little dead for a little bit, so I just chilled in the camper till we would get another eastbound. That eastbound is I192. I192 is a daily intermodal coming from the west, heading to North Baltimore, Ohio. Usually, sometimes it would have UP powers. I've been seeing a couple times where it has CSX power through Deshler on the camera. And well, not for this case. Today's 192 would have a elephant style UPs leading the way. Our next train here would be I-157 with a DC Gevo pair leading the way on I-157. Train after 157 would be I-171 coming from the Baltimore, Ohio, headed to Chicago, Illinois, as his final destination is Los Angeles, California.
5 p.m. I-171 here on the Willard / Garrett here in Deshler, Ohio. We got a train coming north on the Toledo sub, and they'll be taking one of the Ys too.
After 171 went by, we would get a northbound coming from the south. This one is another M558. Coming from the south from Queensgate Yard, Cincinnati, Ohio. Go to Willard, Ohio. This one would have a YN2 leader with a YN3 AC44 Trailiing. It did stop for a few seconds before heading east onto the Willard subdivision.
Eight that's finally going to make their way onto the Willard sub. That'll be it for now. We'll come back when we get a different train since we kind of already filmed 558. The crew in that train is probably like, oh, finally they let me go.
Gee. There's a truck that went across.
I am going to take the Y to sneak up on the car. And then I'm going to go big.
What was that Trailiing 2 out of 4? It's 2 out of 4 because there will be a DPU or rear DPU somewhere in the train. This train is M353 heading from Chicago, Illinois. After working Garrett, he is finally heading south on the Toledo subdivision for Cincinnati, Ohio. CSX 1711 was trailing on M353. 1711 is one of the CSX SD40E. It's one of those locomotives that looks like it has a weird radiator, but it's not as weird as the new 23 DCMs or Tier 4 locomotives as 1716 that we shot on the Louisville local back in March and April. The train that's coming up is B523. B523 and B522 are now abolished, for now. After catching 353 headed southbound for Cincinnati, there will be a westbound after at least an hour of silence. And that westbound would end up having a YN3 AC44 trio. B523 has a duo of GEs leading. While B523 is passing by the park, we would hear a defect detector east of Deshler, Ohio, and that train that was tripping the defect detector east of town would end up being aisle 17. Aisle 17 comes from Rochester, Massachusetts, all the way to Bedford Park, Illinois. He works North Baltimore sometimes, but most of the time he does not work North Baltimore. He mostly just goes straight through North Baltimore and just heads towards Bedford Park. Alright, over by the Deshler Park, we're gonna walk to Marion Street. It's a 10-minute walk down there. So let's start walking.
There's the sheriff. Hey, that's what I said.
Avery, can you press the record button on my camera?
Oh, it's through here?
that train there. It is M252. My thought was that this train was gonna stop the whole entire time for the fireworks till it ends for this train to move. Well, till this crew of 252 started blowing their horn on the lead locomotive. That means that the train is now moving and it's gonna ruin our shot for us. After getting back from Marion Street, we would see a eastbound Intermodal, which I thought would have gone by already while I was sitting by Marion Street waiting for the fireworks. Well, that would be incorrect. This is I-170 coming from the west, heading towards North Baltimore, Ohio for his final destination in North Baltimore, Ohio. The two leaders, which would be the leader of a BNSF Gevo and a H2-9 Trailiing. After I-170 passed, it would be another hour until I was hanging out with the buds and we would just be talking about trains. Train. Yeah, we're seeing trains already. This one is a B741 coming from the Chicago area from the UP interchange heading eastbound for Linden, New Jersey. It will be quite a while until he gets to his final destination, but however, he will be heading east during dark hours, almost to midnight, and I would not be planning on going to sleep for another 2 hours. side, we were given word about another good train that will be heading up towards the Toledo sub, heading for Chicago, Illinois. Our next train that we would get is M510. M510 comes from Cincinnati, Ohio, heading to Detroit, Michigan, not taking the Bateway, which goes up to Perrysburg. He will be taking the connection here by the park with an EMD duo, 9-flare leading, flare trailing. And I think this might be our trainway here. Indeed it was our train. This is M352. 352 comes from Cincinnati, Ohio to Chicago, Illinois. It would have the Baltimore and Ohio Heritage Locomotive leading. 1827 led on a 559 on 4th of July, and it's now July 6, 2025. It's 2:30 in the morning, and the B&O Heritage Locomotive went through Deshler during dark hours. After being woke up and seeing a 141 coming from Walbridge, Ohio down to Louisville, Kentucky with a SD-70 flared Mac, trailing 2 out of 2 heading to Louisville. Anyway, after we would get the train, we would end up having a manifest coming from the east, heading towards Chicago, Illinois. It's an M429 coming from Cumberland, Maryland to Chicago, Illinois. It would have a 73 series of a CM rebuild. After 429 cleared, we would have a northbound coming from the south. As I thought this would be M506, well, it ended up was M506 with another Mac duo coming from Cincinnati, Ohio to Walbridge, Ohio. I would thought he would go through Bateway, but he is not. He is taken to connection, but unfortunately he is going to stop by the crossing and sit there to wait for 3 trains that are going to go through before 506 goes east. basically a three-way beast, as basically 506 end up stopping. Our train that's going westbound is I-115. That's the train that's going eastbound with the BNSF pair with the P5. That one is I-172. The 115 ended up stopping because, well, I've been told by the radio there was a guy that was just waiting the train, and they end up finding the guy that was just waiting in there. So they end up putting the train into emergency for at least 10 minutes. And you gotta think, this was god awful hot even at 9 in the morning. So it was kinda rough just being on this side. I kinda wish I went on the other side, but whatever. I probably wouldn't see the 172 anyway. Next eastbound is I018. I018 comes from Chicago, Illinois to Baltimore, Maryland, with a solo 7250 in the lead. After I-115 cleared and ended up going on a move again, our next train is I-3. It's a westbound intermodal Hotshot heading for Bedford Park, Illinois. This is basically our final train of the trip. Our next train will be M560 with another SD70 Mac. And this time, it's not a Mac Duo. There is a GEVO behind the Mac, and this will shock you, a -8 locomotive on this train. If that GEVO wasn't on there, that would have been a sweet ass lash up with the Mac and -8. After 560 stopped, we kind of figured that there would be another train. So I went back on the other side on the Willard to see what was going on. And well, that would solve my mystery. There would be an eastbound intermodal heading east from Chicago, Illinois, heading to Port Newark, New Jersey. This train is aisle 10. Aisle 10 comes from Chicago towards east. The leader today would be 3420 and 3024. Both of them are Chivos, but I thought this would be the last train for the whole entire trip, since we gotta make our way back anyway. And it's Sunday, I have work the next day, I wanted to just go home and relax. Since I did not get much sleep the whole entire trip, but this whole trip was worth it anyway. I had to say my final goodbyes to my friends that joined me for this whole trip. And this video will be ending anyway. So, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time in the Mitten State or the Buckeye State Whale.